This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by lynda.com, the unparalleled online video training library. For a free 10-day unlimited trial, visit lynda.com/MacVoices. MacVoices is in San Francisco for WWDC and the AltConf. I'm here with Victor Agreda, a new friend and an old friend, because this is the first time I think we've ever met, although we've probably seen each other at different conferences. We've been on Twitter together, but never had the chance to shake hands, so welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm a big fan.
Well, thank you. I'm a big fan of your work too, and unfortunately I have no idea why you've never been on MacVoices before, but we're fixing that now.
That's great to be here.
So where are you hanging your hat now?
I am actually doing a little bit of work for RCR Wireless out of Austin, Texas, which is a trade magazine for the telecom industry. So it's aligned with, where Apple's making all their money right now, which is the iPhone, and that's a really interesting space.
So I think you're known for the unofficial Apple weblog and your sharp wit there, shall I say. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. We had a good about 9-year run with Tua, and we tried really hard to help people and explain things in a way that they could understand, and also debunk rumors and all of the good stuff that just cuts the signal through that noise. And it was super fun to do that.
Do you miss not being just totally immersed in the Apple space?
A little bit, but it's one of those things that I was always an Apple fan, so I'll always be an Apple fan, and I still keep in touch with it, but it's kind of nice to not have to worry about the day-to-day, what's happening, and just kind of lay back and see how consumers see it,
So if that's your beat now, and that's the way you look at it, what are you doing at the Developers Conference? It doesn't quite seem consistent.
Well, what has changed so much because of the iPhone is that telecoms are having to work with developers much more closely than they did before. 10 years ago, if you wanted to tie into the network layer, you had to have very high-level meetings with AT&T or Verizon or GT Wireless, whatever it was back then, and now they have APIs. They all have APIs, and you can tie into networks in ways that 10 years ago were completely unthinkable. So, with the Internet of Things, with smartphones, with smart cars now, so much is coming online that the telecom industry has been radically remade, and they are trying very, very hard not to just be dumb pipes. They want to be an active participant in this disruption. So for me, being here to be able to see what Apple's doing and to talk to developers who are tying into these things, that's a really, really huge deal.
Do you feel like it's a situation where they're playing catch-up, or is it just a recognition of the fact that they need to be part of the space now?
I think it's a little bit of all of those things, really. One of the things about this is that it took everybody by surprise. You heard at the keynote that they were surprised by the success of the App Store and just the explosion of the App Store. So all of these networks have been surprised. And I mean, anyone who went to the first South by Southwest with the iPhone will tell you just how surprised AT&T was, because the network was terrible. They didn't deploy any of the cows that they have. It was one of those things where, they just didn't realize how many people were going to be using their network. Now, successively, they've learned from that every year, and it's been really cool to see the transformation, because these companies are getting it, and they're understanding we have to have as much bandwidth, as much capability as possible, and give these guys better tools so that our networks are more efficient. And if you think about that, the innovation that's been driven from that is truly extraordinary. And again, I don't think anyone could have predicted that that was going to happen, especially at the scale and the speed at which it's happened.
I'm really intrigued by the way you're explaining it, simply because in so many circles the telcos are viewed as the bad guy for a lot of reasons, and sometimes I think it's very much justified. Other times I'm not quite so sure. How do you see it from what your experience has been?
I think that from a business perspective, they have no choice but to adapt to the market, right? So anyone who would have said, no, you know what, if you're going to tie into our network layer, you're still going to have to do these meetings and do these. They found very quickly, you do that, and you're going to have a problem. And as big as they are, Verizon, AT&T, you may say, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is there are a lot of smaller telcos that are out there. There are the local, telecoms, your Crickets, and those sorts of companies. Well, if they can be more adaptable, I mean, that's a classic business story, is that if they're smaller, faster, more adaptable, more customers are going to go over there. So what's been really extraordinary, I think, is to see, Verizon and AT&T, they have their problems, and sometimes they do things that maybe consumers would see as not in the consumer best interest. But they are adapting quickly, and they've made the cold calculated business decision that we have to adapt and we have to provide a better value for people. So I think that's been a positive change, and it's something that Apple talks about that some people don't believe them. People see Apple sometimes as an evil empire, right? And the fact is that they're trying to do these things, and the innovation that they create actually makes everything better, even for Android and BlackBerry and Windows Phone users. I mean, they're all benefiting from that sea change.
And it's tough for some of us to realize, just like Apple, we know how huge Apple is, but these are telcos, and they have hardware infrastructures that have to be adapted, updated, maybe changed. So you can't turn a dinosaur on a dime, unfortunately.
That's right. Yeah. Even with the first iPhone launch, Andy Grignon told me the story one time and he was one of the first people on the iPhone team. Okay, and he went to AT&T or was it Singular at the time. And he met with one of their head engineers, and they were talking about visual voicemail. Now, they had proposed visual voicemail, and they said, no, we can't do that. And he goes back to Steve Jobs and says, well, we can't do visual voicemail. Steve made a few phone calls. Next thing you know, they're scheduling meetings to figure out how to get visual voicemail to work. So you look at that and think, well, look, that was a feature that Apple could have said, okay, fine. If you said no, we're not going to do it. But they made this behemoth change, and so that's the sort of thing that they didn't even have any market position at that point. They had really no leverage, other than the network saying, oh, well, maybe this iPhone thing will be a hit, right? Apple's done okay with the iPod, maybe that'll work. And look at them now. Now they have a huge amount of leverage, right? So they can continue to do these things and change those companies, whether they like it or not.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but you look back and think, it would have been foolish to bet against Apple, but it was a whole new market for them too. So I guess it maybe made sense to at least consider the possibility that it could have failed.
Well, look at it's a classic now example of presentation style differences when you looked at Steve Jobs introducing the iPhone, and then the Singular executive come out, and he had the note cards, and he was fumbling, and it was so striking, but that's also illustrative of the differences in culture between Apple and a big telecom company like that. That's, they're just sort of, I don't know, it's just an old way of doing things. And Apple, one of the beautiful things about what Steve did before he died was change the company, and not really change the company, but reinforce the company's roots as an innovator and as people who are willing to tear down the things they've made to make new things, to make better things. And as a company, as someone who worked at a big company and someone that a company was trying to change all of their business practices, that's a non-trivial task. That is an absolutely huge task of human engineering. And I think he said once, actually, that was one of the proudest things that he had done in his life, was ensure that Apple has that entrepreneurial spirit and is not going to be like a giant telecom that doesn't know what the left hand, the right hand are doing. And I think that's amazing, and that's why they keep innovating.
It's you see it in other industries with other companies too. It's very comfortable to get where you are and then try to hold on to it instead of pushing ahead to the new thing. And as you said, tear down to build up again and build up bigger and better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, the iPod is always the classic example where did they have to put the music app in the iPhone? No, they didn't have to. There's no law that said they had to do that, but they did, and now iPod sales are basically flat. There's still a market for them, but the fact is that you've got the iPod on your phone. I got to think that there are companies out there that shall remain nameless that would have looked at that and said, no, this is going to hurt sales in this other product category, so let's not do that. And then customers, imagine if you'd had the iPhone and you wouldn't have been able to put your iTunes purchases on the iPhone. That would have been ridiculous, and especially looking back now, we would have said, like, that's just crazy talk, right? But I guarantee you that there were people at other companies who looked at the iPhone and said, well, wow, they're good. They just hurt their iPod business. Are they crazy? And in fact, someone probably did. There's some claim chowder out there waiting to get claimed. But yeah, the company is just unafraid of making good products, even if it means hurting the other products. And that, again, they've taken a little bit of criticism from the Mac and the iPad lines sort of crossing over, and is one cannibalizing the other or whatnot. And they even admitted it, I think, on one of the investor calls. It said, maybe cannibalizing, our Mac sales or whatever by the iPad matrix and the pricing and all that sort of thing. But they don't care. It's the idea is just to make great products. If that means this one doesn't sell as well, then that's fine. We're just going to keep innovating, and it's going to sell a lot.
Well, think about it. Would you have an iPhone in one pocket and an iPad, an iPhone in one pocket and an iPod in the other pocket? No. You would probably give up the iPod.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is that at the end of the day, Apple always looks at what's the best user experience. And I think that is where, thankfully, telcos are starting to learn that as well. The customer, I can see an enhancement in customer service alone. AT&T, back in 2007, was not very responsive, and there were a lot of problems. And they're not perfect now, but I do notice that now if you tweet at these companies, they respond within an hour or so. Their customer service has actually improved in many cases, and they're trying to, as Comcast I think said recently, suck less. They're really trying to get better about these things.
And the fact that they're recognizing it, just one more change to the world. I know you're busy, you got things to do, but I do have to ask. I've had a chance to talk to a number of people here this week. And I guess I'm still kind of processing. What are you hearing and what are you seeing? Are the exciting things, or are the issues going forward? And how's it going to affect Apple in the coming year?
I think there's a lot of stuff. We've looked at like iPad, split screen, there's a lot of user-facing features that are going to be fantastic. But Swift going open source is huge, because that means it's got a chance now of being a standard. Objective-C was much beloved by many people and much reviled by many people. And the thing about it is, if you weren't developing for Apple platform, why did you need to bother, right? Well, now with open sourcing Swift, okay, so now you can put Swift on the server, you can do, all of these different things are going to open up. And I think, again, Apple's sort of opened up a box, and it doesn't even know maybe where this will lead, what direction this is going to go. So I think that's absolutely enormous. A more immediate effect is going to be watchOS, and the new watchOS that's going to support native applications. It's, again, someone made the opinion the other day that's like, I can't believe they launched without this. And, well, the iPhone launched without an app store as well, briefly, and that's what Apple does. They cast the line way out there, and then they pull it tight, and they reel it in. It's very, my fly fishing analogy is pretty constant over the years. That's what they do. The first version is lacking something, and then guess what? They update it very quickly via software, and it does something else. So that's going to be huge. I'm just interested to see how developers take advantage of that. The watch apps have been pretty good so far, but now we're going to really see them work on the watch. My only question on that is how it's going to impact battery life.
Yeah, there's so many questions, but I'm glad you brought that up, because battery life was one of those things that everybody was worried about. And within 2-3 days of people testing it, battery life disappeared from the conversation.
That is one of the magical things about Apple's machine overall. They know how to say messages. They know how to message an idea. And one of the ideas that I think that they put in people's head was, don't expect, too much out of the battery. So they set themselves up. It's sort of the Scotty technique, right? Say it's going to take 8 hours, and when it takes 4, it's like, oh, wow, you're amazing, So I think they kind of set people up to say, oh, well, whenever it's going to be a problem. And then when it really wasn't a problem, everybody was super happy, and so they just dropped it.
Hey, Victor, it's great to meet you in person, and thank you so much for the time. And we'll have you on MacVoices more regularly if you're available.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Chuck.
Folks, more from San Francisco, more from Alt Conference and WWDC. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting MacVoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.